Aspect ratio is a fundamentally simple concept with a deep and important history. Now, simply put, the aspect ratio is a ratio of the width of an image to the height. Now, this can be expressed in two numbers like 4 by 3 or 16 by 9, or as a decimal such as 1.85 and 2.35, though these decimals can themselves be written as ratios like 2.35 to 1. But how did it all begin? Well, for that answer, let's turn back the dial of history and look back at the very first aspect ratio from the very first motion picture. We owe the very first aspect ratio to one man, William Kennedy Dixon. Dixon worked at Thomas Edison's lab as the staff photographer. After Eastman Kodak began producing flexible film in the early 1890s, Thomas Edison wanted to put this new film to use in a device called a kinetoscope, the precursor of the projected film. So, after a few years of start-stop experimentation, they finally arrived at a working prototype. Using 35mm film, Dixon settled on an image that was 4 perforations high, resulting in an image that was 0.95 inches by 0.735 inches, a 4 by 3 aspect ratio, or in decimal 1.33. Now, we don't really know why Dixon settled on 4 by 3, but it stuck. In 1909, the Motion Picture Patent Company, a trust of major American film companies who were all practically under the thumb of Thomas Edison themselves, declared that 35mm film with Edison perforations, a 4 by 3 aspect ratio where the image was 4 perforations high, as the standard for all films that were due to be made and shown in the US. Well, this settled it, making film and projection ubiquitous across the United States, and for a whole generation, everything pretty much stayed the same. Now, when synchronized sound came on the scene in 1929 and optically printed on the film itself as a strip that ran alongside the image, this caused a slight shift in the aspect ratio. But in 1932, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences voted on and declared that in order to make room for the optical soundtrack, the image should be masked off at the top and bottom, bringing it to a 1.37 aspect ratio. That is so close to 1.33 that it is sometimes used interchangeably. Well, this new image size, this new aspect ratio, would be called the Academy ratio, and it remained the standard in Hollywood for yet another generation of moviegoers. The 1950s was a tumultuous time for film. The industry was forced to restructure, and the decade saw the rise of the film's little brother, television. Now, since everyone alive at the time had been going to theatres and watching films in 4 by 3 aspect ratio, it was only natural that television would carry over that same screen shape. Like a new sibling in the entertainment family, TV was getting all the attention, and that reflected in the small movie-going audiences. How could film get butts back into seats? By offering something they couldn't get at home. On September 30th, 1952, a film premiered that sparked off a decade-long war for widescreen film formats, and the result would be a new cinema aesthetic.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cinerama.
Brainchild of Fred Waller, who pioneered a multi-camera, multi-projector system for a combat training simulator for bomber gunners. Cinerama used 3 35mm cameras shooting at 27mm lenses and exposing 35mm film at 6 perforations high. This process captured a 140-degree field view for an aspect ratio of 2.59. Projected on a deeply curved screen using 3 projectors and boasting a 7-track surround sound system, this Cinerama was a huge hit, running for 2 years at the Warner Theatre in New York City.